निवासिनि विष्णुविलासिनि जिष्णुनुते.
What are the things you mainly know about Vivek Ramaswamy so far? If you are more on the economic right and a bit on the cultural right, you just know that he is a great proponent of these policies. He is a great advocate for these policies, and him being a Hindu, etc., a proud Hindu in a white and Christian majority country, standing up to all these people and changing their minds, etc., taking away support from Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump. No one thought that Vivek Ramaswamy will be able to give them any significant competition. Most people didn't even know that he exists. Okay, some people did read his book Woking, and even Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida himself, read his book and implemented all the policies against gender studies, etc., critical race theory in Florida colleges and universities. But what you all don't know, what I didn't know until today, is that he has an insane philosophical and even academic grasp of capitalism, first of all. But even that's kind of expected. Okay, what's not expected is his grasp on Indian politics, Indian economics, the history of Indian politics and economics, and India's caste system. He has an insane grasp of all these things, and all that was visible in this second chapter. And he has come up with great solutions as well, for which I would like to take a little credit, because even I have been, lots of other people as well, have been saying that capitalism is a great way to solve caste system and casteism issues, untouchability, whatever of it remains in India. The biggest criticism we can make of our leftists and academics, leftist academics, so-called leftist politicians, so-called anti-caste parties, is that they have mysteriously been against casteism and been against capitalism at the same time. They have been terrible at ease of business. I don't think they even have heard of the phrase ease of doing business. Okay, they are always like doing union bazi and threatening the factory manager, etc. And capitalism is the main thing that could have solved casteism. What other thing could have solved casteism? That is Hindu unity. Okay, so all the most anti-caste parties have historically been both against capitalism and Hindu unity, both of which could have solved casteism, and both of which are today done by Yogi Adityanath. Okay, I'm not saying he's some great free market guy, but he is bringing investment, economic prosperity through the hands of capitalism, more or less. Okay, which is why UP is growing and prospering at a gigantic rate. All the workers who are being kicked out from Karnataka for being North Indians and for not speaking the local language, they are saying yes, we are happy in UP. Even now, work is coming in UP only. Why should we go there and can listen to galis? Now, Vivek Ramaswamy has basically recommended the same thing with, of course, brilliant articulation and a brilliant grasp on the topic, the history of it. But only reason we are going to discuss it today from a live stream is because we are listening to it from a guy who was born in USA, from in Ohio, Cincinnati. ऐसा एक आदमी, ऐसा एक बंदा, फिर भी उसके पास कितना बढ़िया knowledge है casteism का and the ways to solve it. That's the brilliant, insane, incredible part. And even until now, everyone was basically fans of his parenting already, right? Because of his speeches that went viral from when he was 18 years old. All that showed that, yeah, this guy's parenting is off the charts. Parents must have done something incredible. After this, reading this second chapter, I'm now even more convinced that his parenting is absolutely phenomenal. Okay, so this second chapter is called How I Became a Capitalist. So one of my favorite books is How I Became a Hindu. Now, How I Became a Capitalist is always also a great thing to check out. This new woke version of capitalism isn't the capitalism I fell in love with. In fact, I hardly recognize it. I fell in love with capitalism when I was very young, when I had to spend months at a time apart from it. Okay, a great way to write a sentence, that I fell in love with it when I was staying away from it. I fell in love with capitalism when I was very young, when I had to spend months at a time apart from it, in a small village in India called Vadakancheri. But I also learned to be wary of it. Okay, I learned to be aware. Okay, I learned that there might be some problems with capitalism as well, a perspective he would probably not have if he was in USA. In USA, the main problem we see these days is that either people are so much in prosperity that they can't even understand what are the benefits of capitalism. They think everything good just falls from the sky. Like Thomas Sowell says that good things just magically happen, and only bad things are somebody's fault. That's how leftists think. Either some people think that we don't need capitalism for good things, or some people are so engrossed in capitalism that they are not noticing what are the problems with coming out of capitalism. Otherwise, why would someone still vote for Ron DeSantis or Donald Trump after all the things that Vivek has argued for? Okay, if there was one thing my dad wanted to teach me when I was a child, It was where we came from as a family. One thing he mandated during our childhood was that we spend several weeks every summer in the village where he had been raised. Okay, so American kid coming to Kerala in the summer. My father was one of 7 children who grew up in the same house along with more than 20 other relatives. His siblings, who lived in Ohio and neighboring Indiana, went back to Vadakancheri for the summer too. So every summer in the late 1980s and early 1990s, a cadre of elementary school age kids from the Midwest would land in Vadakancheri for a few weeks. That often meant my dad had to floor his bank account in order to afford the international trip for our family of 4. It was worth it for him. Look at this. From the very first few paragraphs, you understand what a great father his father was. Okay, he made sure that every year we are going to go to India in the summer, no matter how much how uncomfortable it is, no matter how much money we have to spend. 4 लोगों के लिए टिकट्स एवरी साल इंडिया आने का, ठीक है? Why? Because it's necessary. You'll have to see where I grew up. You'll have to see my family. You'll have to learn the local traditions and cultures to whatever extent possible. My father's childhood home in India couldn't have been more different from my hometown in Avondale, Ohio. It was a complex of 3.5 interconnected houses, including my grandparents' home. There was a veranda out in front with clotheslines where our clothes were washed and dried. The air was so moist that droplets of water would stick to our skin. The ambient soundtrack of life in Vadakancheri included a cacophony of our cows moving outside and rickshaws blaring their horns as they passed. The scent of incense hung in the air from the candles that burned in the morning and evening in our prayer room. There was no dishwasher, so we often ate meals served on large banana leaves instead of plates, using our hands. The toilets appeared to be holes in the ground that we squatted over. To flush them, we filled up a cup of water and poured it down the hole as many times as it took. We used to boil water and let it cool to have something to drink. Air conditioning was only a dream, and we got a bad stomach flu at least once per trip. But we also learned that there's more to life than being comfortable. We heard stories about my dad from family elders that he had never told us. Okay, things about his father that even his father didn't tell his children, that maybe he thought it would be too much of a boasting. Okay, it happens, right? Someone else had to tell them about his father, or maybe childish, funny, hilarious stories. All of that. What a great vibe to grow up in. We visited the same village school where my dad first learned English. We learned to pray at the local temple. My cousins and I used to play hide and seek throughout the complex. Sometimes sounds like the entry of a Miranayan movie, right? Sometimes we would try a makeshift version of baseball on the front veranda, where the clothes were drying and swaying in the wind, blocking our view. The service ladies didn't seem to mind that we changed their laundry schedule, but my dad definitely did. The games were even more challenging because we had to hide from him. He was irked we were being dumb American kids instead of absorbing traditional values. But we brought a new version of baseball to Vadakancheri. Avoiding my dad was just part of the game. On the surface, the absence of first world comforts was the most striking difference, but as we grew accustomed to life in India's boonies, we found it was kind of fun. The more remarkable differences were cultural. There were some ways they were immediately visible. We usually walked around inside and outside without shirts, like most of the adult men. We visited the local temples by foot in the morning and evening, and so on. At my father's behest, we spent quite a lot of the day praying. Listen to this. At my father's behest, we spent quite a lot of the day praying, just like the other Brahmins in the village. The prayers I still say today are the ones I learned in Vadakancheri. तो भाई प्रेयर करके एथिस्ट ना होके इसका इसका जिंदगी में क्या रुक गया? हार्वर्ड भी हुआ, येल भी हुआ, मिलियनेयर भी हुआ, प्रेसिडेंट भी होगा, या तो 2024 में नहीं तो 2028 में. But the strangest differences weren't visible to the untrained eye. My grandmother, whom we called Ammai, had lived in that house since she had moved there with her 3 sisters in the 1940s. They weren't especially wealthy, but by birth they were all Brahmins, the traditional caste of priests and teachers, the protectors of knowledge and understanding, the scholars. Look at this understanding of the Brahmin caste. We Brahmins were the highest caste, though not the richest or most powerful. Okay, I will repeat almost every sentence that's being written here because these are very important. We Brahmins were the highest caste, though not the richest or most powerful. Okay, this is being written by a guy who was born in USA, who is not a sociologist, who is not an academic, who has not really spent his lifetime studying caste system. The holiest of us are called sannyasins and are supposed to beg for their food. Kings were below us, richest were some Vaishyas, the commercial class, but they were only of the third caste, just above Shudras, the service caste. A Brahmin's obligation to pursue knowledge didn't come attached to money or political power. It came from his birth status. In the world of Grandma Ammai's village, it was most honorable to understand the world well. So it was obvious that Brahmins would be the highest caste. Our status as Brahmins didn't even really correspond to our jobs. My grandfather was a farm manager, my dad was an engineer, and his older brother became a doctor. But they visited the temple morning and evening, lived modestly, observed customs, and passed on their traditions to future generations. As Brahmin men, we wore a punal. I guess they call the Janeu punal. As Brahmin men, we wore a punal, a sacred string, across our body starting around age 8. Most Kerala temples required men to remove their shirts before entry, and you knew who was Brahmin and who wasn't based on who had a punal. We had people who had supported the house by providing domestic help. They weren't technically my cousins, but we treated them like relatives in many ways. For example, the old lady who cleaned the home lived only a few houses down my grandparents. We used to be scared of her as kids. She would scold us as though we were her own kids. We somehow always knew we were supposed to bow at her feet, just as we did to our grandparents. As kids, we didn't process the fact that these people who provided service to our family were in the lower caste, while we were the highest. But my family and hers knew the difference. Neither family would allow their kids to marry into the other. Money wasn't the reason for her family's difference in caste from ours. In fact, the money was entirely irrelevant. But also, what I will of course point out for any commies hopefully watching this video someday is that even though this particular woman, a service woman, was from a lower caste, she used to scold Vivek Ramaswamy as a kid, just as if she would if Vivek was her own son. Okay, Vivek was supposed to bow down at her feet. So, itna tak casteism, caste barriers had been broken down already, but they maintained it in other ways. If the villagers thought of the principles of India's caste system at all, they thought of them more as values than rules. Out of those values came beliefs, like the facts that only Brahmins could enter through the front door foyer and that lower caste people ought to go down the alleyway and enter through the side door, past the cow. Only Brahmins entered the prayer room and kitchen at certain times of day. While these sound like rules and restrictions to an American ear, to the villagers, they were just facts associated with a proper understanding of the world. I asked my father and the other elders why we Brahmins lived in different spaces and ways than the others in the village. I never got a straight answer. Kids like the son of the lady who served us could go on to get educated and make more money, but they would still be part of a different community. Seeing how much this system revolved around honor and status helped me understand how much the American system revolved around wealth. And while my father always taught me to never over prioritize the pursuit of wealth over virtue, it seemed to me that the pursuit of wealth equally by all was still preferable to a system of honor based on birth. That's when I began to fall in love with capitalism. Sure, in America it was possible for people to blindly pursue wealth above more virtuous callings in life, but because money gave some people access to status, America was a place where anyone could achieve any status no matter their birth, something that seemed fundamentally different from the world of Vadakancheri in the 1990s. That seemed pretty cool to me. So, what I was afraid of is that he might not know enough about India's politics, India's history, or the caste system. And I thought that if he does become more of a significant voice in the Republican primary race, I thought that the news anchors will come after him with his caste only. He will be attacked for his caste, and there I thought Vivek will probably not have a great defense, or maybe he will prepare for it the night before. Now I'm absolutely sure that whatever they hit this guy with no matter what Modi's policies, India's policies, the Hindu caste system, जो भी बोले Vivek को, it won't matter at all. He knows this shit inside out. He's going to answer everything that's necessary. This is truly a once in a lifetime candidate they have. But wait and see what his critiques of capitalism also are. As it turns out, there's nothing superior about Brahmins and certainly nothing superior about them marrying each other. Not even their sense of humor is superior. They only seemed funnier to each other because the caste system had them hang out together. It's not even true that knowledge is better than power, wealth, or service. But all of those domains can be part of a good life, and to enable that diversity, you have to allow people from different groups to associate with each other freely. Sometimes you even have to let them marry each other. Historically, the caste system, certainly the British influenced form of it, wanted to keep all groups and their provinces separate. Check this out. This is when I decided that I absolutely have to do a live stream. This one sentence about caste system is almost unknown to most people who study caste system in the country, in our country. And of course 99% of the people who are not academics but always pretend to be anti caste, even they don't know these things. Did you hear what he said? Historically, the caste system, certainly the British influenced form of it, wanted to keep all groups and their provinces separate. That proved to be a convenient way for the British to pit different groups against one another and consolidate power. Okay, this is not known by most people in India, most anti caste people in India. But he's being fair as well. But the British didn't make it up from scratch. Even according to the ancient system, everything had to be kept pure. No doubt there was something beautiful about that purity, but there was even more beauty in what it missed. What a great sentence. It may have been beautiful because of that purity, but there was even more beauty in what it missed. As a child, I understood that the American system saw the world in a radically different light. The American dream is to have it all: knowledge, power, money, and service, in no particular order, and as much of each as you want. Because America offers the hope that they can all fit together in one life, here, knowledge is power, and so is wealth, and power gives you the ability to serve others. Service should give you power too, especially in an efficient market. And that is what I have always thought of India's social workers or the Communist Party, SFI, these people, that they think they are an NGO and they think all political parties should be NGO, and the whole timers of the party should be the NGOs and give their lifetime service in these parties, doing jobs that should have been taken care of by the government bureaucrats or by the private sector. But the workers of the party, the small number of good people that which are there in every party, those are the people who spend their lifetimes serving the people or serving the party by doing these sorts of things. But it shouldn't have been that way, because service should give you power too, especially in an efficient market. And India is not an efficient market. It is to a certain extent now. It has never been until 1991, and not until 2014, even to a large extent, and definitely not in Bengal. Work hard, do well at one or two things, get paid, and the money can help you get the rest. Anything that even might be good, America tries to offer you. Hang out with who you want, say what you want, pray with who you want if you want, marry who you want. You and only you decide what it means to have it all. The contrast between capitalism and the caste system was striking. Living in Kerala every summer as a kid made me miss America. Capitalism was the first ideal I really loved, the first time I had ever loved a system. Capitalism brought people together, the caste system kept them apart. My dad's a liberal, and he argues that American capitalism creates a new caste system based on wealth. That's hard to deny. But that's not the goal of capitalism. Certainly not the pure form of it that I fell in love with as a kid. Capitalism is supposed to be just an economic system, not a social system. And the caste system is supposed to be the opposite. It is supposed to be a social system, not an economic system. Paradoxically, that means they both share one fundamental precept in common, which is the size of your bank account has nothing to do with your moral worth. That is common in the capitalist system as well as in the caste system. Yet over the next 30 years, it was actually American style capitalism that slowly bound the wounds opened by caste. People now regularly marry across caste lines. There's no rule about who can and can't enter a house through the front door. The lower caste guy who works at Domino's now delivers to our home in the village, and my family tips him to show their appreciation, just as we do in America. When you eat out at Pizza Hut, you ring a large bronze bell to say thank you. When you leave, funny enough, the exact same kind of sacred bronze bell that we used to ring when we left the village temple. By allowing Indians to share goods and services with each other freely, capitalism gradually allowed them to marry whomever they wanted to as well. Capitalism, an economic system, fixed these problems with caste, a social system. With the free exchange of money and services, people could choose their own relationships with each other. No matter what caste you were born into, you could work hard, get paid, work your way up, and end up meeting a lot of different people. From there, you could find out what others needed from you and what you needed in return. An efficient market actually rewards figuring out exactly what the other groups of people want and need. So people naturally stopped segregating themselves. In capitalism, people make good money figuring out how to efficiently distribute food. There's no honor code that requires you to beg because Brahmins were supposed to beg. More than 30 years have passed since the first time I visited Vadakancheri. As the years aged me, they changed Vadakancheri too. After my wife and I got married, I took her on a trip to Vadakancheri, Apurva Tiwari, who's herself a throat surgeon. I took her on a trip to Vadakancheri to show her that a village I remembered from my childhood, to show her that village I remembered from my childhood summers. But that village was long gone. Vadakancheri and I were both mature, in some ways, and we each had a couple of new flaws. Listen to this. What a great way to write. Vadakancheri and I were both mature in some ways, and we each had a couple of new flaws. It was still a village near verdant rice paddies, but the house now had air conditioning. The soundtrack still included cows mooing, but cars had replaced the noisy rickshaws. The road was paved. There were fridges and cold bottled water in them. There were toilets that you could sit on and flush. Today, there's hardly a caste system left. And here he adds a footnote. You won't believe what the footnote is. The footnote says the main vestige of the caste system that's left is a government enforced quota system that demands that colleges, businesses, and other institutions reserve a certain number of seats for scheduled castes. He puts it under quote scheduled castes, descendants of lower castes, a system that fuels toxic identity politics in India. Can you believe what I'm saying? Can you believe what this guy has written? The presidential candidate of USA, born in USA. He's saying there are institutions that are supposed to give certain number of seats for reserved for scheduled castes who are descendants of lower castes, and this is a system that fuels toxic identity politics in India. Phenomenal. Now, today there's hardly a caste system left. People regularly marry across caste lines. I don't think the pizza or air conditioning caused it. But it was unmistakably the same force that brought pizza and air conditioning to India that had also eroded the caste system. Capitalism was one of those rare forces more powerful than birth status, and it had spread to India. Not just to the cities, but out to the boonies all the way to Vadakancheri. Not everything is better. It's still 100 degrees in Kerala, and the moisture in the air still sticks to your skin. There seem to be more mosquitoes than ever, and they still love American blood. The caste system's gone, but there are new problems. Many of the problems with capitalism are well known. For example, the unequal distribution of wealth based in part on how successful people are in the game of commercial enterprise. But the biggest problem with capitalism isn't just that it enables some people to buy more things than others. Rather, the great danger of capitalism rests in its inherent expansive quality. Capitalism has an uncanny ability to organize our society's commercial affairs better than we could have ever imagined. But it has an equally uncanny ability to extend far beyond commercial life. Like light, it will reach as far as it possibly can unless we purposefully contain its scope. Even though it is an economic system, it has the power to reorder social systems too. Our family experienced this firsthand. As consumerism extended its reach all the way from America to Vadakancheri, it quickly supplanted the historical norms of the village. While free enterprise had nearly eradicated the caste system, it also had the effect of pulling apart our once tight knit extended family. Now that's also under threat because of capitalism. My grandmother, whom we called Ammai, had lived in that house in Vadakancheri since the 1940s, alongside her older sister, Pedisammai. I don't think any of them ever paid attention to who paid for which expense. It was just something that happened. It was a Brahmin virtue to live simply, so spending money was little more than an afterthought. अच्छा हाँ चलो किसी ने पैसा दे दिया होगा. But everything changed in 2006 when my great aunt Perisammai passed away. She was the matriarch of the family, and one of those rare figures who could, it seemed, contain the otherwise inevitable spread of light from one space to another. But she could only do it for so long. She was in the prayer room, lighting the candles on each of the lamps, as she had done for countless decades. One day, the flame on one of the candles lit the back of her sari. setting it ablaze. She suffered full body third-degree burns and passed away several days later. Over the next decade, things changed dramatically in Vadakancheri. The house itself was better. There was a new refrigerator. The bathrooms had been redone with those Western style toilets. When my cousins and I visited India, we got sick less frequently. I learned that Shri, who was Perisammai's granddaughter and my second cousin, was responsible for those improvements. She had emigrated from India to Europe and married into a wealthy family. She used that newfound wealth to modernize her childhood home, where the rest of the clan still lived, including my own grandmother. Okay, so Vivek Ramaswamy's father's side's grandmother also lives in that house, which was now modernized by a daughter of a brother of Vivek Ramaswamy's father. Yet there were other changes beneath the surface too. Years after Perisammai passed away, we heard that Shri's side of the family had requested that Ammai, Vivek's grandmother, move out of the house and join her own children in America. That would have been unthinkable a decade earlier. The biggest difference was the death of my great aunt Perisammai, whose sheer presence loomed large enough to bind a sprawling family together. But it would be naive to think that the spread of capitalism had nothing to do with it. Yes, it brought air conditioning and bottled water to our family home in Vadakancheri, but it also brought with it a new consciousness about who paid for what. We know these things in our families, right? For post 90s Indian kids, we know all these things have happened in some way or the other, to some degree or the other, in every family in India. My dad's side of the family was doing fine in America by that time and could have borne the costs too. But the real problem wasn't the money itself, it was the new consciousness of money within the family. Eventually, Ammai came to America, an immigrant like her children, like Vivek's father and mother. Like all immigrants, she was searching for a better life, but in a different way. She had had a good life in Vadakancheri, and now she had come to America to make one here. She has in many ways. Sri's side of the family was ultimately right that it would be good for Ammai and her kids to be together. She has 13 grandkids and 10 great grandkids, and she visits them all, doing the rounds through Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, and Kentucky. She spends weeks at a time in each place and turns it into some kind of social hub that the rest of the family drops in on. What a beautiful way to describe these things. So that shows you what a keen, beautiful way of looking at things Vivek has. He's not doing it. He's not visiting those family get-togethers just as a something. Chalo bhai, chalna hai, kya kare ab? I'm too busy, but I'll go there anyway. It's not like that. He has observed these things like a scholar, like a true scholar, and dare I say, like a Brahmin. When I see Ammai watching her grandkids play or sitting on someone's front porch in the American Midwest watching a sunset, I think about how she used to sit on her front veranda in Vadakancheri and how she would watch us play baseball as the clothes dried and the light faded. I think about how money can change family relationships and about how there are still some things money can't buy. Maybe that's the moral of my family story. That's when I first learned that capitalism often shows up where it's not supposed to, an uninvited guest in a life. Like light, it travels everywhere constantly, in all directions. Like light, it can grow things. But sometimes the light of the candle becomes a fire that sets the whole thing ablaze. Liberals know that capitalism sometimes hurts people, but they frame the issue poorly. They are too focused on how capitalism harms certain groups rather than focusing on how capitalism sometimes harms everyone by infecting other social systems like family life or even social values. Capitalism hurts all of us when it undermines democracy through the influence of lobbyists or corporate social fiats. It hurts all of us when it co opts sincerely held values like faith or feminism to quietly make money. John Rawls is one of those all time great philosophers who, if he were alive today, would still be looking in the wrong place for the dangers of capitalism. Like I say for our Indian leftist academics as well, that they're pointing the gun in the wrong direction. They hate casteism, we hate caste system. They want to do away with caste based discrimination. I want to do away with it as well. But they are pointing the gun in the wrong direction. And therefore, they are not solving it for 70 years, 80 years. Dangers of capitalism would still be looking out, the people like them would still be looking out in the wrong place for the dangers of capitalism. He argued, John Rawls, that justice was a matter of fairness, and that in a system agreed to by all under fair conditions, all would agree that whoever was left with the short end of the stick would still do as well as possible. So Rawls would wonder who the worst off were in American capitalism. He would want to make sure they were still doing pretty well and that they weren't being exploited by the rest of us. Who are the worst off then? Who has fared poorly in America? And who are the people who have been given the least chance to do well? Is it the unemployed? Is it the homeless or the disabled? The elderly or maybe the poor? Are people of color the worst off? Which people of color? Women? Jobless white men in the Rust Belt? Wounded veterans? Wayfaring beggars? The mentally ill? Do the worst off of all stand at the intersections of these groups? Is that what intersectionality means? It's a common question about capitalism and one that I've struggled with too. To me, the question, who are the worst off, is actually the wrong question to ask because it's nearly impossible to answer. There are many good things in life and many ways to lack them. Okay, what a great line. There are many good things in life and many ways to lack them. And there's no fact of the matter about whether a poor white man is or isn't worse off than a rich black woman. Today, like the British in colonial India, we unnecessarily pit groups against each other when we ask who the worst off are instead of asking how capitalism sometimes complicates things for everyone. Grandma Ammai probably wouldn't be counted among the worst off. She's made a good life here. We are a bit more distant from the other side of the family than we used to be, but we have made amends with them. As for our side of the family, we are closer than ever. Ammai visits Vadakancheri for a couple of months a year, escaping Ohio's cold winters for Kerala's warmth. She's not the worst off, but I still wish the spread of capitalism to Vadakancheri had treated her better. I used to be angry at Sri. Now he's giving out personal anecdotes. I used to be angry at Sri. I thought of the way I had appreciated the fridge, the toilets, and the stoves and never knew they would come with a cost. But they had come at an actual cost. Someone had to, quite literally, pay for them. Meanwhile, my side of the family was sitting blissfully unaware in American suburbia, acting like Vadakancheri was still in the idyllic 1990s and like money didn't matter to us Brahmins. Okay. Incredible, right? This is insane amounts of observation and secrets that he's observing and letting us know, and things that we know has happened in some magnitude or the other in our families as well. I'll read this paragraph once again. I used to be angry at Sri. I thought of the way I had appreciated the fridge, the toilets, and the stoves, and never knew they would come with a cost. But they had come at an actual cost. Someone had to quite literally pay for them. Meanwhile, my side of the family was sitting blissfully unaware in American suburbia, acting like Vadakancheri was still in the idyllic 1990s and like money didn't matter to us Brahmins. Over time, I came to think my side of the family was in the wrong too. Capitalism had come to India, even to Kerala, and it brought changes we didn't expect. It changed the norms. I was mad at Sri because I thought she was violating Vadakancheri's old norms. But in reality, that code had changed long ago. My dad and his siblings in the American Midwest just hadn't woken up to the reality that Vadakancheri in 2015 was fundamentally different from Vadakancheri in the 1990s. In the new capitalist world, unlike in the old system, it was normal to expect that children would give financial support to their own parents. Shri had been fixing up the house that her dad lived in. She had been doing that for years, mixing her sweat and labor with it, making it more and more a product of her efforts. In the new system, it was perfectly normal for her side of the family to feel like they should be the ones living in the house. Back in the 90s, the fact that my grandmother Ammai had lived in the house for so long would have been a powerful justification for her to continue to stay there. Tradition trumped capitalism. But in modern Vadakancheri, the relevant fact is who invested in the home. So, who really owns the house? Nowadays, the answer is no different in Vadakancheri than in Ohio, which is whoever paid for it. Capitalism didn't just reorder the caste system in India, it changed religion too. In the 1990s, we used to make pilgrimages to temples across India. We would wait in line with the other devotees, often for a day or longer, waiting our turn for a few seconds before the deity. We used to get our heads shaved to the scalp while waiting in line. Like any spoiled American brat, I dutifully whined about it to my parents. Secretly, it was fun. When my family visited again in 2011, we didn't do that anymore. When we visited big temples, We made a donation at the front and avoided waiting in line with the other devotees. We took a private car instead of a rickety bus. Our pilgrimages became more efficient. At Tirupati, a sort of Hindu Mecca in southern India, there's a ticket based system. Everyone gets in if they wait long enough. But if you pay, you can shorten the wait. If you pay a lot, you can skip the line altogether. And if you pay a ton, you get to do a special ritual right in front of the deity. You just select your ticket at the kiosk. That's what's supposed to happen at Disney World, not a temple. It betrayed my understanding of what prayer was supposed to be about. What's the moral of the story? I learned two lessons. First, capitalism doesn't have an on and off switch. Capitalism eroded the caste system in India, but it also dissolved the subtle bonds that held my Vadakancheri family together for generations. My dad no longer has to run his bank account to zero to make a family trip to India. But capitalism had also caused my parents to worry in the 1990s when my dad, who under Jack Welch's ruthless tenure at General Electric faced layoff risks every day while raising two kids in a foreign land. Those realities were inseparable from one another. Capitalism thrives on individualism and picks apart institutions built on collective identity. That's just the nature of capitalism. Maybe that's a good thing when it tears down institutions like caste, but it also tears down other communal institutions that are worth preserving. And that's my second lesson. I love capitalism, but I love other things too, like family and religion and democracy. In order to save those things, we need to protect them from being infected by capitalism. I shouldn't be able to buy a fast pass at Tirupati any more than I should be able to buy extra votes in a democracy. Which is why I'm saying there is a way to do capitalism and to save Dev Bhumi. I will take a short break from reading this a bit. I'll drink a little bit of water, but also uh, remind you guys that if Kushal Mehra, Abhijit Iyer Mitra, they have really read this book and they understand and agree with these things, and then they criticize Jesai Deepak or his book, saying that it sounds like the Communist Manifesto. I don't know what the fuck they're talking about. Okay, I absolutely love and respect those people, both Abhijit Iyer Mitra and Kushal Mehra. But this is what Jesai Deepak has been saying. Why we need a decolonized approach to looking at things, and also how we can do things without absolutely destroying our religious, cultural norms, institutions, etc. Okay, just because you're a pro market free market libertarian guy doesn't mean you absolutely destroy Himachal Pradesh or Uttarakhand. Okay, we have to come up with a middle ground. Doesn't mean we become tree huggers and kill capitalism in the entire country, but doesn't mean we destroy those mountains as well. Okay, there has to be a middle ground. Now a libertarian would probably argue that there is a there should be some way to incentivize it. How the fuck are you going to economically incentivize devotion to a god? Okay, so there has to be something other than capitalism there. And that's my second lesson. I love capitalism, but I love other things too, like family and religion and democracy. In order to save those things, we need to protect them from being infected by capitalism. I shouldn't be able to buy a fast pass at Tirupati any more than I should be able to buy extra votes in a democracy. Yet that's exactly what stakeholder capitalism is about. Stakeholder capitalism meaning something other than shareholder capitalism. Okay, stakeholder capitalism नाम दिया गया है इस चीज को, things like DEI, ESG, which is that companies or random activists will conjure up out of their minds, out of the blue, who is a stakeholder. Okay, now who is a stakeholder? The consumer, the people who are not investors in the particular company, people who are not direct beneficiaries of the products of the company or the shares of the company, people who just live and exist in the world, are all stakeholders apparently in every particular company. So the stakeholder capitalism means prioritizing their interests, whatever they think, whatever the activists or the company bosses think is the interests of the stakeholders, lyingly or truthfully, that is more important than actually the shareholders of the company. Stakeholder capitalism over shareholder capitalism. So stakeholder capitalism pretends to be a milder form of capitalism, but it's actually capitalism gone wild. It encourages capitalism's winners to wield greater power in our democracy. Ordinary Americans who vote at the ballot box each November are like the poor devotees who wait in the long line at the temple. Meanwhile, CEOs and investors issuing moral fiats from Davos, World Economic Forum, are the rich devotees who get to cut the line. Liberals think the answer is to change capitalism by putting words like stakeholder or conscious or environmental, social, and governance in front of it, ESG. For their part, Classical conservatives think the answer is to ignore the problem and recite a Milton Friedman or Ronald Reagan quote, failing to recognize that, as Dorothy might have said to Toto, we are not in 1980 anymore. Instead, we are in a postmodern Oz where the wizard is no longer just big government. It's a new hybrid of big business and big government, of capitalism and democracy. Abraham Lincoln said 8 score years ago, quote, the dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. We must think anew. End quote. We would do well to heed his wisdom. The solution to today's new dilemma isn't to change capitalism as Democrats try to, but neither is it to ignore the inherently invasive qualities of capitalism, as many Republicans are prone to do, which is why libertarians are absolutely irrelevant in Indian politics. Rather, it's to prevent capitalism from changing everything else. This is what I'm saying. This is what more or less what Desai Deepak is saying. This is what Abhijit Ayar Mitra says, that it sounds like the Communist Manifesto. It's to prevent capitalism from changing everything else. It's not about changing capitalism. Rather, it's to prevent capitalism from changing everything else by building protective walls around things that we cherish most, like democracy. America was built on the idea of separating powers between different institutional spheres to protect people. Our constitution ordains the separation of power between the executive, legislative, and judicial branches, between federal and state government, between church and state. As Americans, we now need to separate the powers of capitalism from the workings of democracy. To keep them alive, we need to keep them apart. Okay, to keep them alive, to keep both democracy, government, and capitalism alive, all of them need to be kept apart from each other. In order to do that, we must first understand what the modern corporation is supposed to be and what it's not. Then he goes on to the next chapter. This is the end of this particular chapter. This is phenomenal work, right?